So, I wait to see whether you think that Frederick's crusade could be considered a success. I mean, it's a bit pointless. The camping was a bad idea. But he did negotiate the return of Jerusalem, Bethlehem and Nazareth to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, alongside access to the sea. But the Muslims were to retain the Temple Mount, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because remember, as we know, Jerusalem's a holy city for Muslims as well. The Muslims are able to effectively govern themselves and retain their own access. The reason they were able to do this is because Al-Kamil was wanting to concentrate on continuing to unite the territory that Saladin had previously held. So you might think, God, success, Jerusalem is back. And yet no one is happy. And that's because it's not a military success. And it becomes apparent during this crusade that the military aspect is pretty central to our new crusading ideology. The religious aspect is also very central, and the popes are really not happy that the Muslims have access. In fact, it went so far, some viewed it as an act of treason. That's only some though. There are other chroniclers, other primary sources that record that some people were like, this was great. We got Jerusalem back and we didn't shed any blood. That's a major accomplishment. A lot of the anger about getting Jerusalem back and not being good enough and yada, 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 is likely to do with who it was that managed to get Jerusalem back. Gregory IX, Pope Gregory IX, hated Frederick. And the Pope had a fear of the Papal States, which, if you look at this map, is around the area marked by Rome, being crushed by the Holy Roman Empire. And that's because the Holy Roman Empire has roughly modern-day Germany immediately to the north, but it also has got around the Kingdom of Sicily immediately to the south. And so the Pope's getting increasingly paranoid that he's going to get squished in between territorial expansion of the Holy Roman Empire, and he's going to get caught in the middle. So because of this, the Pope actually attacked Frederick while he was off on crusade, and this marks a period of political crusading against Frederick and his family. And his family line, his dynasty, are known as the Hohenstaufens. And ultimately, the Pope is the victor. The Hohenstaufens are wiped out as rulers. From a Muslim perspective, they bewail the loss of Jerusalem, but they do generally have nice things to say about Frederick, who they call a Muslim sympathizer, which is pretty rare. And it's obviously written by Muslims who don't really know that much about the Franks. The other important thing that comes out of this crusade is the Franciscans, St. Francis of Assisi's followers. The Franciscans become very active missionaries. They move eastwards. It's the Franciscans and the Jesuits who spent a lot of time out in the east later on, trying to convert people to Christianity. So this is the beginning of Franciscan missionary work and a beginning of a long relationship with the Holy Lands too. So if you were a religious historian, this actually is a pretty big deal. But again, just to emphasize the point that we're in a time period where what it means to crusade is totally changing. It is becoming a papally sanctioned war against the enemies of the faith rather than an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And we can see that when they get Jerusalem and they're not really that bothered. It's now a period of military service to the church rather than accomplishing a goal. We've talked about how it was trending this way before, but it's pretty overt by this period of time. Frederick's truce ends in 1239, and predictably the Muslims take back Jerusalem. We then have the Barons' Crusade happening, and this is led by Thibault of Champagne and Richard of Cornwall, and they play off a still divided Muslim world to bring the Kingdom of Jerusalem back to the largest it has been since 1187. So the Barons' Crusade is kind of one of the most successful ones of these later ones, even though it on paper really shouldn't be the most successful one. But some things do not change in the Crusader states. Infighting is one of them. Infighting plagues the Crusader states. Frederick had a son with the many married Isabella. His name was Conrad, and Frederick, because of his marriage to Isabella, who's one of these women leaders of the Crusader states. We've met her before. He was regent in place of his son of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. But when his son got to be he left his minority, came of age, well, Frederick can't claim to be regent of Jerusalem any longer. This is the end of Frederick's official rule in Jerusalem, the end of Hohenstaufen rule in the east. Conrad is to take over. And it's all lost when there is another step towards unity from a Muslim perspective, when Al-Salih, he allies with the Khwarezmians. Enter the next European monarch we need to know of, Louis IX of France. France is pretty powerful at this time. Louis was a well-respected king. Like Richard, he considers himself a Crusader king, although more pious. So by the time we get to King Louis's Crusades, it's really just Louis and the French who are involved in these. Frederick's not involved. Frederick's still alive, but he's not involved because, as Madden, I think, really beautifully puts it, Frederick II was in his customary state of excommunication. I just don't think I can say, I don't think it's possible to put it any better than his customary state of excommunication. Louis's plans overlap with the previous Crusades in many, many ways. You know, he allies with the Pope. We're now in Pope Innocent IV, and by doing this, he gets income to pay for his crusading plans. He's also like, hey, we're not going over land. You know, I mean, God, the Fourth Crusade has happened. Nobody's going over land to the Crusader states anymore. But he's also going nowhere near Venice. If you look at this map, he is going to use Marseille, which is his own port on the Mediterranean, and he's going to contract from Genoa, which is, I think it was on the previous slide actually. Yeah, there it is. It's like the opposite side of the Italian peninsula from Venice. So he uses Genoa to sail from Marseille. As you see from this map, he sails across the Mediterranean and he stops off at Cyprus to resupply and bring everybody together. Cyprus is marked on this map as Limassol, because Limassol is a town in Cyprus. Again, big theme here. Let's go for Egypt. Let's improve on Damietta, which is now 31 years before. So what do? They take Damietta, and they manage to take Damietta because the population of Damietta is like, oh, hell no, we're not going through what happened 31 years ago again. We're not having a repeat of the Fifth Crusade. So they're like, oh, we got Damietta. That was so easy. So then they got to make a decision. Do they go to Cairo or do they go to Alexandria? Do they smash the empire or do they negotiate? So what do? They decide to go to Cairo via Mansoura. This means they go and camp in the same place as the Fifth Crusade did. Okay, we can already see why this is a bad idea. Now here's a map of Egypt, which has got... Why did I pick that? I was sure this one had all the sites we wanted on it. Okay, evidently, I'm sure I had that one. Okay, going mad, don't mind me. Let's go back to this one then, because we're going to talk about Cairo, Damietta, and Mansoura. So they decide to go to Cairo via Mansoura, which, as you can see, is going to take them further down the Nile River and away from the coastline. An informant tells them of a ford across the Nile River at Mansoura. So they're like, great, let's send Robert of Artois off to secure a crossing for the rest of the army. And they leave Hugh of Burgundy in charge of holding the camp. Robert attacks and he's successful. He then gives the order to attack Mansoura, and that was a failure, and most of them were killed. Louis, in the meanwhile, had crossed, found the camp empty, and then had a big bloody fight with the rise Muslims. But at the end of the day, they did manage to possess the Muslim camp, and the Muslims had retreated to Mansoura. What happened next was that the Muslims moved their boats overland, they carried them, and then used to, by carrying them over the land, used the boats further downstream to block the Crusader shipping lines back to Damietta, and also their water-based escape route back to Damietta. So this was a good move from the Egyptians' perspective. Louis had to give up his camp. They trudged back to Damietta. Louis had to surrender. Turan Shah, the Egyptian leader, he ordered that all the poor were massacred and that all the sick were massacred. The reason for this is he wanted to take hostages and have them pay to be released. He wasn't going to get any money off the poor or off the sick. The hostages were when they were released, when they were paid off, they were to leave Egypt, but the King Louis and his men had to hand over Damietta, and they had to pay 800,000 bezants, while Louis was to also be a hostage until half the ransom was paid. It was a lot of money. Meanwhile, the Mamluks revolt against their rulers, and the Mamluks become the new Muslim leaders. They take power. They agree to the surrender, but they still don't liberate the hostages. Louis, they save up the money to get Louis released. He wanted to travel onto the Holy Lands and secure the release of his hostages. But he was ultimately kind of saved by the Mamluk usurpation because the Muslims were divided again, and Louis was able to play them off against each other. Louis made an alliance with the Mamluks for the restoration of Jerusalem, for the release of his remaining hostages, and the cancellation of the enormous sums of money he still owed them in debt. He was away for a long time, and you know, having the Crusade king leader as a hostage, never going to be a great thing for morale. But he'd been away for a long while, captured. There were a lot of problems back at home in France, and it was becoming pretty apparent he wasn't able to do very much in this particular trip to the east, so he left in 1254. I'm going to end this video now. You've got another question to answer about King Louis, and then my third and last video.